Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to iWizard. So today we are going to explore the topic of writing and publishing, and I have two special guests with me tonight. The first is His Imperial Radiance, the Solan Emperor Christopher of House Ruocchio, the 23rd of that name, firstborn son of Earth, King of Avalon, Lord Sovereign of the Kingdom of Windsor and Exile, Prince Imperator of the Arms of Orion, of Sagittarius, of Perseus, and of Centaurus, Magnarch of Orion, Conqueror of Norma, Grand Strategos of the Legions of the Sun, Supreme Lord of the Cities of Forum, North Star of the Constellations of the Blood Palatine, Defender of the Children of Men, and Servant of the Servants of Earth. Welcome, Christopher. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me back, man. Every time I forget you do this, and then you do it. It's good to be here. It's good to see you guys.
It's a thing. And hailing from the great state of Utah, the author of the Five Warrior Angels trilogy, and most recently the Lonesome Crown. He is a fantasy artist, very talented one, and a booktuber. He's got the best channel. He's also, I think he's a correct me if I'm wrong, you're a prison librarian. Welcome
Oh,
to the one and
I
only Brian Lee Durfee.
thank you for that great introduction. I was a prison librarian. I started as a prison guard and then moved to I've worked in the gang unit, the mental health unit, the intake unit. Then I worked in the libraries for about 5 years. But now I teach life skills like anger management and thinking for a change and different things to the inmates at the Utah State Prison. So I've slowly risen up the ranks, and now I'm a teacher at the prison.
That's noble work. That's awesome, man. All right, so guys, thanks for being here. First, I guess let's start with this. I actually wanted you guys to tell my listeners your stories. Um, Going back to how you guys decided that you wanted to become uh, writers, fantasy writers, etc., sci-fi writers, your early influences. I don't know, like, did you go to college? Did you not go to college? How you started your career, how you guys wrote your first novels. For you, Christopher, why don't we start with you, Christopher? How did Empire of Silence come about? How did this whole journey that you're on, how did that begin? And then we'll go to Brian.
Yeah, so I knew this is what I wanted to do like ever since I was a little kid, right? I was reading really early. I read Harry Potter like as it was coming out, and I was like 4 or 5 when the first one came out. I can't remember exactly. And then I made the sort of natural progression to Tolkien, and by then it was sort of game over. I knew this is what I wanted to do, and so I like had no idea how to do it. I assumed I had to be like 80, but I got started anyway, figuring out how to get there eventually. And so I would write all the way through grade school. I'd have all of my notes on the right side, all of my nonsense on the left side of my notebooks, right, no matter the subject. And then I would just try to write, like, after I finished schoolwork, at night, at recess, whenever, right? And eventually I finished something in high school. It still exists somewhere. It's terrible, but I finished probably a novella. And then I decided I was going to keep trying, keep doing this seriously. I got a degree in English, which you do not need to do if you want to be a writer. It helps in certain respects, but in other respects, like your other career options, it's somewhat limiting. So I did that. I like to say I tried to be a writer with no net because my backup plan was being a writer. Except that I backed into an internship with Bain Books, who are a science fiction fantasy publisher. They're now my publisher. They were not originally. And I worked for them for a year, and then that was my senior year in college, during which I put the finishing touches on a book called The Murdered Sun, which eventually became Empire of Silence. It was about half as long. And I went to work getting an agent in the classic way. I never really considered, doing crowdfunding or doing indie stuff at the time. I in my head it was like I wanted to be the kind of writer I grew up reading that was a traditionally published writer, so I wanted to do that. I got an agent in November 2015. I graduated December, and then sold 4 books to Daw in January of 2016. It took about a year and a half to get the book out for one reason or another. Maybe we'll talk about that. But it's been it's been the job ever since. So I had basically as sort of stereotypical or as typical, I guess, a sort of origin story as possible with regard to the writing. I didn't do anything unusual. I got an agent the normal way. Got rejected like 51 times, I think 52 times, and which is like low actually. I know some people who got to 3 digits, yeah. So that's basically the story in a nutshell.
Oh my God, if you got rejected 51 times, what hope is there for me? Okay. All right, Brian. Tell me your story, Brian.
Well, I started out young too. I mean, I remember purchasing the first ever book with my own money of my own volition, and it was The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. And within the first 100 pages of reading that, I knew that I wanted to be a writer or at least an illustrator because I was very taken with the illustrations that were in that book. And there's one specific line that one character said to another one within the first 100 pages of that book that I was like, oh, if I write a book, it's going to be about that. And I've kind of built my entire trilogy, even to this, the Five Warrior Angels was really built around that one specific line out of the Sword of Shannara. A lot of people, I've mentioned this before on a lot of podcasts and interviews and stuff. A lot of people try to figure out what line it was. Some people have guessed correctly, but I never let anybody know which one it was. But then some of my earlier influences, other than Terry Brooks, were of course Tad Williams and Ken Follett and Larry McMurtry and George R.R. Martin, of course, and Robert Jordan. And I love the Dragonlance books. I mean, when I was a really young kid, Dragonlance was the epitome of literature, I got older. I went to college for art. I had an art scholarship. I mean, my artwork took off. I dabbled in writing a little bit as a teenager, but I could tell I was not good. But I was very good at art, and people were complimenting me left and right. So I took off with that. I got an art scholarship to college, got my art degree, did paintings for Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, a bunch of other different companies. Kind of was a struggling illustrator for a long time, and until I got the job that I have now working at the prison, which is a full-time job, which I'm glad I have, and a lot of writers need one. I didn't start writing until I didn't pick up that dream of writing until I was about 30 years old. It was just a dream for a long time. And then I wrote for 14 years. I wrote a really bad horror novel. I tried to be Stephen King because he's my favorite writer. And it was really bad. I submitted it to exactly 100 agents in New York and got exactly 100 rejection letters. However, there were about 5 or 6 that came back with some good feedback and that said I had talent and, hey, you were a really good writer. We just don't represent horror novels, but good luck elsewhere, kind of a thing. And so I knew I was at least getting somewhere. And then I wrote my fantasy novel. And I slowed down a little bit on that one. Instead of submitting to 100 agents, I just picked out the top 6 agents in New York that represented fantasy, not just fantasy, but they had to have represented a fantasy book that was like 1,000 pages or more, because my books were going to be big. And so when I approached my agent, I specifically wrote, all 6 of them, I submitted my query letters and my sample chapters, and all 6 of those agents requested a full manuscript. So I was like, oh, wow. I went from 0% to 100% with my second book, but I'd only submitted to 6. Anyway, it boiled down to me signing with the agent that I signed with, and gosh, it was really quick. I mean, he did have me do some rewrites, before he submitted to editors, but he got me a book deal pretty quick with Saga Press. And we had some other interest from some other publishers too. But we signed with Saga Press. They seemed to be the most excited about it and stuff. And I couldn't be happier with the way things have turned out. I guess I could if I'd have turned into J.K. Rowling or like Dan Brown, or so it's like a blockbuster like Da Vinci Code. But it was about the way I expected.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe you could both tell me what the process was like as first time authors. One of the reasons, I'll start with you, Christopher. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on, besides the fact that we're friends and I like having you on, is because you have tons of experience and you've published a bunch of books. But you're also young, and I remember I was watching a panel. It was with Brian Lee Durfee, and I actually think that he scheduled it, and it was with Tad Williams, and it was with Matt Bialer, and there was one other writer, and I forget who that is.
His name was Scott Drakeford.
Yes, Scott Drakeford.
Published with Tor.
Yes. Yeah, and it was all about publishing. And I remember, Brian, and maybe you can fill in my memory here, that one of the audience members asked like Tad Williams about like, what to do to get your first novel published. And I was getting really excited. I'm like, okay, Tad Williams is going to tell me what to do. And I love Tad Williams. But he basically told this story about like publishing in 1985 and mailing these big fat manuscripts in, and about the fact that like it's the publishing industry is just not the same as it was. So he didn't really have like a ton of advice because it's totally different now. And his advice really isn't relevant anymore because the technology's changed. So anyways, I'll start with you, Christopher. For you, what was the publishing process like? And secondly, what can you tell, I don't know, budding young writers who've written something and want to try the traditional publishing route? What should they be aware of? What should they keep in mind? So in other words, what was your experience and what should like first time authors know?
Yeah. Before I get into like my whole story, since it's relatively early, the first thing that should be said is that if you are submitting, you're looking for agents, right? Or for that matter, if you're looking for publishers, the money should come to you. If anybody's asking you for money, whether it's a reading fee for an agent or a publisher, or if they're asking you to pay to publish the book, they are not the sort of publisher that's going to get your book into Barnes and Noble. And the agent probably is just going to collect that money and walk, right? Like agents should not be asking for money under any circumstances, really. Literary agents shouldn't be asking for money. And if a publisher is asking you to pay them, they're a printing service, fundamentally. And like there are times that it's good to use a printing service for something. Say you are putting together a like collection of like family stories or something. You're only going to print 30 copies and give it to all your cousins. That's cool, right? Like those are legitimate businesses, but don't confuse that for like Penguin Random House, right? Like those are different things. But definitely be wary of those agents. Like that's the first thing. So I want to make sure that's said as early as possible, because people can walk on that landmine pretty easily. It's not as bad as it used to be. It used to be pretty bad. But as far as my process, like I said, it was pretty typical. I had done a lot of sort of reading. I like knew how to do this. There are people who will go to like writers workshops and network there, or they'll meet agents at conventions or something. I didn't do that. The one advantage I had was that because I worked at Bain, I had a copy of their Sci-Fi Writers Association directory, which had all the agent contact info in it. That just saved me 3 hours of Googling. It wasn't like a huge leg up, but it was useful. You can find all this stuff online. There was a website I used called Query Tracker, I think .net, and I believe they're still around. You have to make an account for it. At the time, it was free. I don't know if it still is. But they have directories of agents and contact information, emails, and all of that. And I would just sort for science fiction, fantasy. Usually, when agent that will do one will do the other. Sometimes there are people who only will read one. You just have to be careful. What you need to do in looking at an agent's sort of wish list, basically, is make sure you actually look at it, right? You can, like, Brian was talking about, like, we don't represent horror. But like when I worked at Bain, we would get submissions for stage plays. We would get submissions for books of poetry. Just stuff like we just don't do, right? Like way outside the box. I could understand someone wanting to publish like a romance novel, like there's some crossover there, right? But like we don't do stage plays, right? Read the instructions, because that's going to increase the sort of odds that you can do feedback. Because we were saying this right before we started recording. In a lot of ways, the submissions process is a shit test that's designed to sort of sort out your soft skills, your professionalism, your timeliness in responding to emails, your ability to follow instructions. So agents will ask for maybe just your cover letter, because you'll need to write a cover letter. It's like applying for a job, right? And you should make that as short as possible, but that's a whole other thing. You'll submit your cover letter. Some of them will want just that. Some of them will want to see that in the first chapter or the first 5 chapters or the first chapter and like a synopsis or just a synopsis. Very rarely they'll say, just send me the whole book or whatever, right? Do what they say to the letter precisely, because that shows that you are a serious professional and not a goof, right? So I would do that, and I would send them out in like batches of 5 or 6. And then if I didn't get any responses, I knew something wasn't working, whether that was my letter sucked. Eventually I had a prologue. I cut it completely and just started with what is now chapter 1, because I decided that must be the variable that's not working. And you should send them out in little batches so that you can test that, right? If you get absolutely nothing, not even like, can I see the next 5 chapters or something? Something's wrong. So I would go in little batches and I would change things. I changed the title like 3 times during this whole process. Like I said, I cut the prologue. I changed all sorts of things. Eventually, finally, I got a hit. Then when that happened, everything went really fast, like Brian was saying. I think the day I got a positive response from the lady who became my agent, she was like, "Hey, this is great. I just sent her my letter. Can you send me the first chapter?" Sent her the first chapter. Like 3 hours later, I was like at dinner, and then she texted me, was like this, or emailed me back and was like, "This is wonderful. Can you send me the rest of the book?" So that happened like all in one day, right? Within like 8 hours. And from there, I think she signed me like within a week after that. Because like once they're like sure, like things will move quickly and like it will feel maybe surprising. But if you can get into that, if you get in like that, then things will move fast. That was in November, like I said earlier. So we didn't really do anything because publishing, more than a lot of other industries, like completely shuts down in December. Like just nobody's doing anything. So I took a month and I did some revisions on my agent's advice, and then about 2 weeks after the new year, we sold the book to Daw, and there were like other publishers who sort of were floating it. I almost went to Ace, so that was a timeline that almost happened, and Daw just had a little bit of a better offer at the time, and I got a call from the editor who says, "Hey, really like your book," and they do the same thing, right? They'll be like, "I have a couple notes. I want to see how you feel about them," right? They'll tell you what those are, and you just say yes, right? Because they want to make sure that you're not a crank or a grump or something like that. And once you're sort of in, you can have a more negotiated conversation about how you want to handle edits. But like when your response is sort of the predicate for whether or not you get the contract, you just be very agreeable, right? Regardless of your feelings, right? But don't prostitute yourself, but you just like, oh yeah, that was like totally cool, like get that, like it was interesting, be happy to like talk about options, right? So did that, we signed, and then you start editing. I don't know if you want to talk about the editorial part yet, or if you want to move to Brian, but that was sort of the whole getting in the door.
All right, Brian, why don't you tell me that was great, Christopher. Brian, what was the experience like for you? And then maybe you can jump back in, Christopher, with the editing.
Yeah. So one of the things Christopher said, which is accurate, is read the submission guidelines and do what they say. Now, what I'm going to say next is don't do what I say, don't do what I did, because I kind of broke the rules a little bit. I at the time, when I submitted my horror novel, this would have been around 2003, 2004. I did paper submission, and so I put stamps on the envelopes, sent a query letter with 3 sample chapters through the actual mail to all of the publishers, because that's what they wanted. That's what their website said. That's what the literary guide to agents book said. And so then later, about 2012, when I was trying to get an agent for my fantasy novel, I did the same thing. I did paper queries, and then I didn't realize until later that they all wanted email queries. And every single one of the agents, the 6 agents that contacted me and read my sample chapters, were like, your submission got my attention because I hadn't had a paper submission come through the mail in years. And they were like, I was stunned that someone sent me a paper submission. And so I opened it and read it, and had it been languishing in a slush pile of emails, I don't know. So I got lucky just by being stupid. You know what I mean?
Would you
Just
recommend that like I do that or anyone else do that? Is that like would you recommend that?
You can do what you want. Now, as Tad Williams said in the Comic-Con panel we did in Salt Lake City, I think he literally, in his story, didn't he literally throw his submission over the window into the office of the agent or something like that?
Yeah, he like put it in the copy machine or something like he had some underhanded sneaky method that he used.
That's what he did. Okay, here's the story that Tad Williams told. I remember now. He sent them a paper submission, but he also sent the whole book. And what he did was he never heard back from them. So he wrote them a letter saying, hey, I sent you this book. Unfortunately, it was my only copy.
Yes.
And I had a flood in my basement and it destroyed my other only copy.
You have my only copy.
You guys have the only copy. And so could you get it back to me? And so they went searching for it. And then when they found it, they read it, and it was Tail Chaser's song, and they gave him a contract. So everybody's story is going to be different. And like Tad did it his way, being sneaky. I did it my way just by being stupid, by not, just by, I just regular mailed them a package, and they were stunned to get a package. It worked though, and you're just gonna have to figure it out. Nobody's path to publishing is the same as anybody else's, and it's the same thing as nobody writes a story the same way. That everybody's writing process is different, everybody's submission process is different, everybody's road to publication is just different. So I cannot tell you that there's one specific way. Like I'd said, I fell into mine ass backwards. I would not recommend doing what I did. I would go with Christopher's more solid advice, which is follow the rules, because it is a shit test. They are trying to figure out who the professionals are and who the idiots are. And breaking the rules is one way to point out that you're an idiot.
I remember you saying something at that panel. I haven't watched it in a couple of years at this point, but I remember you saying something about how shocked you were to receive. I mean, you were happy to get published, but you got so many red marks on your book, which is probably the experience that every author has. But I remember you were shocked. What was that like to go through the process of editing, going back and forth with an editor and that sort of thing?
Okay, so from someone who was not in the business and was just coming at this with a rookie sort of, I was a rookie, and entering the big leagues, and then my edits with Joe Monte, those were just more of like plot edits and story edits and character edits. It's when I got the line by line edits from the actual editors that are spotting all the punctuation mistakes and grammar errors and capitalization errors, and I was like, every page had like 20 red marks on it, and I was like, holy shit, why did they even sign me to a book deal? I mean, I'm looking at all these red marks, like, how they must think I'm the crappiest writer they've ever seen. With all, I mean, it was really shocking to me, and maybe Christopher Ruocchio's experience is different. He's brilliant. He was born brilliant to be a writer, so I doubt that he even had one red mark.
Oh no. No, where I didn't have a lot of notes was on the story editing stuff. That's a whole other story. But no, like the grammar thing. Thinking about that is publishers actually don't. I don't want to say they don't care, right? Because if you defy the conventions for how a text should be assembled, right? You don't do dialogue properly unless you're like, oh gosh, I just like
Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah, Cormac McCarthy, right? Then you can if you're him, you can do that, right? But like if you a random person try to flout the conventions of English grammar completely and deliberately, they probably won't read your book. But like if you like don't know how to handle a semicolon, like they can fix that, and it's like relatively cost effective for them to fix it. It's not that expensive. So like maybe it's useful to like explain real quick. Like if your book's sold, right? The first thing that's gonna happen is the editor who bought it has read it already, right? And they have opinions, and you're gonna talk to them about those opinions. It might be a phone call, it might be a Zoom call now. I actually once was in New York and actually had this conversation in person, which was cool. Very, very Maxwell Perkins. Maybe call you on the phone. Who knows? At the very least, you'll get some kind of email with like a letter in it. They'll have a bunch of notes. You'll probably get that period. Some editors might not do them or not do them reliably. Editors, like authors, are all different. And but you'll have this letter, and it'll have like sort of the sort of grand, problems, issues, things to think about in it. Your editor on this first pass may also have made some like individual like track change, like line edit notes, but they won't have gone through really thoroughly. So now you may do that again. You may revise everything, take into account everything they've said. You may choose to ignore some of it because, like I said, it's a negotiated process. The editor is not God. But like really neither are you, right? Like it behooves you as the author, despite the word author, in authority being, linked etymologically, to listen. It behooves you to listen, because you could be too didactic. And this is another way in which you like cause problems, cause frictions with your editor. Sometimes also the editor is too didactic and that causes problems, but it is a negotiated process. So you might do that several times. I know the most I've heard of an editor going back and forth with an author 11 times. I won't say who that is or what book it is. It is one that everyone has heard of. And then actually the author crapped out at the end of that sequence and said, "I'm not doing it anymore." The editor was like, "We could still make it better," but like you'll do that cycle, and then it'll go to the copy editor. And the copy editor is really who I think most people are thinking of when they think about editing. The copy editor is the person who makes all of Brian's red marks, right? It goes in and fixes your semicolons, your commas, your em dashes, and catches as many missing words as possible, which is the one I'm really bad about. I just like skip words sometimes. So they'll fix as much of that as they can. And then you get to review all of that. So you go through and you look at all the track changes, accept, reject, accept, reject. And then it'll go to the typesetter. And the typesetter's job is to format the pages so that they look like the way they do in the actual book, right? They change the fonts, they change the styling, they make the chapter headers look cool, they put their running heads in with page numbers, right? They do all that stuff. This is one of the reasons why when I'm writing the book, people are like, "Oh, bro, how many pages is it?" And I say, my answer is useless, right? Because I could say, like you see, like George Martin say, "Oh, like Winds of Winter is 1,800 pages." Yeah, that's Word pages. That's Word document pages. It's not real pages. The typesetter gives you the real page count. That's why we always talk in terms of word counts. So when the typesetter's job is done, then the resulting file or the page proofs, right? And that's basically the document that's going to look the way it's going to look in the actual book. And then the book goes to a proofreader. It may go to 2 proofreaders. One of those proofreaders may be you, the author. And usually you get to look over it again. At this point, if you're the author, you're usually so sick of this damn book, you don't want to read it again. But at least I am. But then you read that, and then it's done. It's too late to accept any changes. Usually, it's when those proofs are made that the advanced copies are made. So the advanced copies are not proofread yet. They are copy edited, and they are edited, but they're not proofed. And then the book goes to press. It gets printed, and all that happens. So that's basically the process. For me, my original editor, because I had 2 editors when I was at the she left about 8 months in. She got a better job at Orbit. And I was orphaned for about 6 months. Like nothing happened. But she wrote like a huge, like 15-page letter with a bunch of notes, and resulted in me completely rewriting The Murdered Son. It doubled in length because like what her critiques were basically things that needed like more conversation to address rather than like edits. It just needed me to write more. And I like always wanted to write big books like Brian, right? So I like had an opportunity in the editorial process to sneak more book into the book. So I took like basically 3 months. I like barely worked. I was waiting tables at the time, and I was interning at Bain. I think I might have just started it. No, I had just started at Bain. So there was a little table waiting right at the end, and I was going into working for the publisher because I think I failed to mention earlier, I worked for Bain for 7 years, including the internship. And so I like I did my day job, and then like all I did the rest of the time was rewrite this book. So I rewrote Empire of Science in like 3 months, which is like the fastest I've ever done a book since. But I completely rewrote the whole book, and then like I said, it sat on a shelf for like 6 months. I finally got a new editor. She looked at it and said, "Yep, my predecessor did a good job. This book is good to go. We'll send it to the copy editor." And then we went through the the red marks and the page proofs, and it was good to go after that. So that's basically the story.
So Brian, I think you had a similar experience with an agent like disappearing on you. I was like, as Christopher was telling me that story, I was wondering, is that a common thing where you're like stuck in limbo in some, like your agent like gets a better job and yeah.
Yeah, the first agent I actually signed with, it was I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, the Vicinanza agency with Chris Lotz. And
Yeah.
I acknowledged Chris Lotz in my first book because he did have me do a lot of rewrites that helped the book. But then the owner of the company died, and the agency just split up, and everybody disappeared. Now Chris Lotz is still in the business, but it took him a while. I mean, I think he still represents Stephen King and George R. R. Martin. I think he represents King's foreign rights or something like that, but because I know his name in King's acknowledgement pages once in a while. But he kind of vanished for a couple of years, and so that's when I went in and reconnected with Matt Bialer and said, "Hey, Chris Lotz disappeared on me," and I don't have any malice towards that guy because things happened, and his whole business structure changed, and he had to redo everything. But he helped me. I will say that to what Chris was or what Christopher Ruocchio was saying. The copy edits were where all the red lines were. The edits that Joe Monte did with me were very unintrusive, and I was worried because like I said, I was a rookie in the game. I'd just been drafted into the big leagues. I don't even know what to expect, but I'd heard horror stories from people and authors that told me, yeah, I had to rewrite the whole book. I had to get rid of these characters. I had to get rid of these scenes, and that's what I was expecting. And Joe Monte did none of that. He actually write other scenes. It was already a big book, and he wanted me to make them bigger. He wanted big books. He's like, we want to do big books. Let's flesh out this scene more. Let's add a scene here. And some of the suggestions he made, they're some of my favorite writing I ever did. And so it was the opposite. The only thing that he cut was in book one, there was a sex scene, and it was about a page long. He just drew a big red X through it with the note that said, "Let me save you the embarrassment."
Nice.
And that was it. That was the only thing he ever had me remove. That was it. The only thing to this day he's ever had me remove. He's always told me to add stuff.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Unless you're a woman or John Updike, you're not going to be able to write a sex scene that comes across the way that you want it to go across.
I thought it was all right. I mean, I still have it. I still have it in my file of deleted scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, you guys, if can you tell me roughly, I know it's not the same for everyone, but how authors get paid? I know it's kind of a leap, but I've heard that advances are typically small and that, the pickings are slim. I think you were telling me at one point, Christopher, that vastly fewer people than one would expect work at these publishing houses. That something like, if you're looking at Baen, you would think that, dozens and dozens of people work there, but it's really like less than a dozen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering what that process is like. I know there's more to the whole process than just advances. So could you guys walk my viewers through the sort of business model, I guess, of traditional publishing? Um, how these books get funded, how authors make money, what royalties look like, and I don't know, are there other ways authors can make money as well?
Yeah, sure. Brian, you want me to take this or?
Well, I can tell you there's other ways authors can make money. I make my money as a prison guard mostly. I mean, I would say 2/3 of my income are from my day job, to be honest.
Yeah.
Which means if I was to live strictly off of the money that I made as a writer, I would be a starving artist. And I've probably been paid more than most get paid. I mean, I got 3 big advances: the Saga Press advance, and then my German publisher advance, and then my Audible.com advance. Were all significantly larger than what most authors are getting. And so I'm kind of lucky that, I've made, some money at it, because a lot of mid-list authors like me don't make a lot at all. But it was never enough to make me comfortable to quit my day job. And I'm glad that I never quit my day job, because I love my day job. And I think my day job makes me a better person and a better writer, just being where I'm at and dealing with the people I deal with on a daily basis. I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. So if you have a day job, if you are dreaming of being an author, like Christopher Ruocchio mentioned, he waited tables. I mean, there's a lot of, don't think that you just need to dump everything and give your writing 100%, because you can still give your writing 100% and have a 40-hour-a-week day job. You still can. And
Yeah,
that's
you just might not be
probably
able
where
to
you
finish
are,
playing
Jordan.
Elden Ring.
Yeah, what?
I said you just might not be able to finish playing a video game. You might have to set
Yeah,
that
you
aside.
gotta, and this is one of the pieces of advice I give a lot of aspiring writers. And I say, if you want to be a professional and compete with the professionals, you're gonna have to sacrifice some things. And some of those things you might sacrifice are all the time you put into video games and playing them, or all the time that maybe you go to the pub and the bar and on the weekend things. And you got to stay home a lot of weekends and just grind it out with no promise that anyone's ever going to give a shit. But you got to do it because it's the dream. And if you half-ass it, you're never going to make it. Or at least if you do, self-publish it or something and it's not quite ready. And I think that's one thing we need to talk about too, Christopher, is how do you know when your first book is ready? And maybe, Jordan, you can hold on to that question for a minute and we can come around to it. But
Will do.
Yeah, that is a good one. So about payments, right? Like, talk about traditional publishing first, because it's worth mentioning indie here as well, just in terms of, because I've started doing some indie stuff on the side specifically to adjust for some of the problems in how you get paid as a traditional writer. So when you got your book deal, publishers made you an offer. One of the reasons you want an agent is they can get you in the door, because publishers mostly just won't look at random submissions. There are a couple publishers who I'll say they do, but the practical reality is that you're way more likely to get an agent than you are to get a publishing deal without one. So let's say you got that. You get your contract. Now you're going to get paid in advance against royalties, which means that you're getting paid money now for books that you might/will sell in the future. Let's say you've sold a book. It's just one book. You have, let's say it's 3 books, $10,000 a book. That's the offer, right? Now that $10,000 for each book gets split up in a couple different ways. It might be into 3 pieces. It might be into 4. Pretty typical way is 4 pieces. You get a quarter of that $10,000 for each book when you sign that contract. So you have 3 books, you get $7,500 right then and there, because you get the first quarter for each book. That second quarter you're going to get when you deliver the manuscript. So when you've actually finished the text, you hand it in, you get paid out that next $2,500. And then where there are differences is the last piece, maybe it's 3 pieces instead of 4, will get paid out when the book comes out. But in my case, for example, I would get like the 3rd quarter when my hardcover came out, and the 4th quarter when the paperback came out. The reason you do this is to try and spread the money out. It makes it easier on the publisher to pay out writers, especially if it's a big writer. Like if Stephen King's getting $10 million advance for a book, like the publisher might not have that liquid in their account at the time he signs the contract, right? So, but they might have, 2.5 million, right? And so they need to spread that out, and it eases their burdens. But it also helps you get money more regularly, because you don't get money very, very often. Now, as soon as your book comes out, let's say you've got your full advance paid out. You've got $10,000 for this book from your publisher. Every book that sells is going to earn a percentage, and the percentage, a percentage of their retail price, right? So your hardcover is $30. 10% is pretty standard for hardcovers in science fiction, at least. So you get, say, $3 for each copy that sells. That is accredited out of that 10,000 they already gave you. So you don't see any money until you sell, 3,334 books, right? I'm assuming I'm doing the math correctly. I'm bad at doing this a lot. And so you earn that 10,000 out, right? After that, if you're still selling books, one, congratulations. Two, then you'll start to see the money accrue. And that money goes into an account and gets put away and will get paid to you every 6 months. So you get paid semi-annually. Usually, there might be a publisher somewhere that does it quarterly, but all the big sci-fi fantasy publishers I know of do semi-annually. So you get paid for 6 month windows, and it usually there's like a 6 month buffer. So the first 6 months, like it's just gonna accrue. So you might not see any royalty payments for a year after the book comes out, and it might be longer than that if like your book comes out in the middle of one of those 6 month windows, because they'll accrue that as a partial and they'll kick it to the next. You get the idea, right? So you might not see that money for a long time, and you're not going to see any money until you've sold enough to earn out the amount they already gave you. One of my pet peeves, there was this Twitter trend, it may still exist, a few years ago, where people said publishing paid me, right? And everyone was talking about their advances. Publishing will only pay you if they're overpaying you. A publisher could give you $1 million and then sell 5 copies, and then congratulations, publishing paid you. The amount of the advance can only favor you, right? Like people are like, oh, I got a lesser advance than this other writer. Okay, but did you sell more copies than they eventually sold, right? Because then you actually got exactly as much money you were worth. You either, as a writer, get exactly the amount of money that you've earned per copy sales, or you got more because your publisher gave you a giant advance and you flopped, which did happen with one of my foreign language presses. I got a very large advance, and the books didn't do so good in the country in question. That happens. Sometimes you can't win them all, right? And so this creates a problem for you as a writer, because you are only really paid twice a year, and then whenever you deliver something. And so it behooves you then to do as much as you can, so that you get a lot of those signing bonuses and things sort of stacked up. This is one of the reasons why I tell people don't actually write giant books like Brian and I did, because if you write shorter books, they'll pay you probably the same kind of advance for a 100,000 word book as they would for a 300,000 word book, and you had to work 3 times as hard for the bigger book. So there are a lot of reasons actually not to write giant books. This is probably the principal one. It stretches out the payments that you get. But then there are other things you can do. I want to mention indie real quick. If you do write on Amazon, assuming you can find an audience, Amazon pays you monthly. So I started doing that. I wrote these novellas to supplement my main books, specifically so that I could also get monthly income, because that helps to sort of spread things out. Because the other thing, this is like really maybe nuts and bolts, is that you also like are paid on a 1099. You're not paid on a W-2. So the taxes hurt. Like you should put half of whatever you make away in an account and don't touch it until the quarter is over. Because I know a couple of New York Times bestsellers who like got in like, we might arrest you from the IRS trouble. So you got to be careful with that too. So you've got the money, but you don't know how much you're going to owe off of it just yet, and you can't really use it for a while. It's like, it's kind of rough. So you need to like find a way to get as many other income streams as possible, which is probably where the rights that you sell in the contract come into play, right? Because you aren't just selling the book, right? You're selling, or you aren't selling the book. What you're selling is a license for the publisher to print the book under certain conditions, right? Whether that, usually that's English language, either in the world or in North America. It sometimes might have other limitations, or some other exclusions. World English, for example, excludes certain territories. Like the standard World English schedule, like doesn't include Iceland, right? They read books in English in Iceland. But like, a publisher might say World English actually means you have to like read the contract and see what you're selling. You might sell audio with the rights to the books, in which case the publisher will make the audio rights. Now they'll kick you royalties, but they'll get a big cut. So like maybe you try to retain your audio rights. Maybe you try to retain those World English rights. I have a UK publisher and a US publisher because I held on to non-North American English rights, so I could get paid twice, right? Then there's translation rights. You can make money for getting books translated, German, French, Russian, whatever. But there's also obviously the big ones are like dramatic rights. Someone makes a movie. I don't have a movie, right? You probably aren't going to get one, but retaining those rights is important because your publisher could ask for them. It could just be in their default contract. It often is. So you need to make sure, and your agent will know to do this, but retaining a lot of those rights is a good way to get paid again, right? So like I got paid every single time my book's translated, right? Some publishers might try to buy those rights from you when they buy the book, and you might have lost them and gotten $5,000 for your trouble. So make sure you read that stuff because you can get paid multiply for the same book. And that is another way that you can make money more regularly because you're not just having books come out in English, but in 5 other languages or whatever. And that really adds up. And that's all for nothing because you've already written the book, right? So you got to be.
Yeah. What Christopher said is really important about the different licensing rights that go with a created piece of artwork. Whether it's a song or a movie or a book or anything, you're selling licensing rights. And that's why you want an agent, especially for people. I mean, some writers are smart enough to do it without an agent. I'm not one of them. I need an agent. I mean,
Me neither.
and my agent held on to, well, back when I signed my contract, audible.com was not the thing that it is right now. I mean, it barely existed. So audio rights were just not something that the publishers even cared about. So that wasn't in the contract to begin with. Now it's pretty much in every contract. The publisher's going to want the audio rights. And that's why you need an agent that can back up and say, hey, no, 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 no. Sometimes I hear nowadays maybe the most powerful agents can't even wrestle audio rights away from the publishers. I don't know, but I know that the most money I've made off my books so far are from audible.com. I mean, it's a big deal. And I'm glad that we didn't give those licensing rights away for nothing. Because who knows what my publisher would have done with them. And they might not have even produced an audiobook. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they could totally just sit on them. It's important to note, though, that like even when you do license those rights away, like the audio, like you will get paid for them, right? But like what'll happen
for sure.
usually is your publisher then will go sell the audiobook rights to Recorded Books, say, or Blackstone or whatever, right? And then they will get paid, and they will pay you out of that. But that payment usually will go against the advance they've already paid you. It'll get credited to your account, basically, which can be useful. This also applies to like limited editions. So. I have a limited edition of Empire of Silence coming out from my from a publisher in the UK. They had to license it through my UK publisher. I got $0 for that because I still had money on the advance, and it was, more money left out of that advance. My books, my US editions have outcompeted the UK editions pretty significantly. But that all got credited basically to my account with my publisher. So like technically I got paid because it's no longer being held against me as a kind of debt. But it is, I'm not going to ever see any of it. So that's a consequence of I gave away limited edition rights, right? So like that incidentally is like a place where you can really, really, really make a lot of money is if you hold on to those limited edition rights. Those are becoming competitive in the same way that like audiobook rights were, like they weren't an issue like when you and I sold our contracts, but now they're like, ooh, we really want those. Limited editions are kind of the new frontier because Brandon Sanderson's like sort of popularized the whole, limited edition thing, at least in sort of like the publishing conversation space. Obviously, they're like, we've done them forever, right? But, people are way more cognizant of them now, especially because he did that giant Kickstarter and all this stuff. My suspicion is he just had those rights already. I don't know for sure. And so, Tor's looking at all this money they could have had, right? And don't. But like, if you can hold on to those limited edition rights, that's a great way to make money in traditional publishing. If you can hold on to those, or if you can, cut the right deal for them, or something. So you as the writer need to be pretty involved in that contract process. If you have like a family member who like knows anything about contract law, like I have an uncle who's a lawyer, right? Like you should totally like ask them for help, right? If you know anybody who can ask you for help, because your agent. So here's like, I love my agents, right? But there is a thing where like agents' reward incentives are different than yours as the author, right? You as the author want to have slow, long-term, consistent, conservative growth, right? The agent wants to maximize your advance because they get a cut of that, whether that's 10 or 15 or 20, 25%, right? And the agents, you should look when you sign your agent, right? Like 25 is really high. Now for foreign rights, it's reasonable because like there are, 300 some countries in the world, they stand a chance of making you a lot of money. But like if it's a domestic agent, US agent asking for 25%, like, find another one, right? 15 is more ordinary. But yeah, no. So you really want to make sure you read the contract yourself, and you maybe get some extra eyes on it, someone you trust, because the agent. It's not that they're trying to like cheat you. They like really want you to get that big advance because from their perspective, hey, we got you 50 grand, right? That was 50 grand you were never going to get any other way. But what you've done actually is blacken your reputation with the publisher because you're an author who didn't earn out their account, right? Which means we're not going to buy another book from you, bro. In fact, we might cancel your books, right? It's possible like a publisher will say, hey, we already paid you that first quarter, that first third of your advance for books 2 and 3. You earn so badly, we're not printing them. Keep the money, bro. Like that does happen. Because it's the other thing too. If you don't earn out in advance, you usually are not obligated to return it. Like there might be a publisher somewhere where that's true. I've never heard of that happening in science fiction or fantasy. So you will get whatever they give you, right? Like, or say they're gonna give you for the advance, provided you deliver. Some writers haven't delivered, so they're missing advance payments still, or haven't delivered yet, or whatever. But yeah, so get some extra eyes on it. Make sure you're paying attention to these things. If you don't understand something, ask. Whether that's ask your agent or ask someone else you trust. But these documents they're complicated, but they're not impenetrable. They're like 8 to 15 pages long. It's you can read them. They're not like super confusing. So make sure you do that. Actually read the terms and conditions for once in your life, right? So that's important.
All right, so that's very specific. I appreciate that. So I'll swing around to Brian's point, which I think is a good one, and I'll just mix it in with my question. So in terms of deciding whether traditional or indie is the right path for you, what from your perspectives are some of the pros and cons of both of these options? I'm imagining what Brian said, which is I imagine that if you go traditional publishing, you have a lot more. There's someone who is analyzing your book, checking everything, making you rewrite these things, making sure that your story really moves and is entertaining. I suspect that a lot of people who self-publish just think that they're shitting gold, pardon the French, but I imagine there's a tendency to just you hit the end of your book and you just go, okay, I'm just going to get this out there. So what are some of the pros and the cons of both of these options? I know I have two traditionally published guys here, but what should people know? Why don't we start with you, Brian?
Well, since I've never self-published anything, I don't know. I mean, um, the thing I wanted to circle back on was when do you know you should publish something, whether it's self-publishing or traditional? How many drafts you need to do. I mean, like with that horror novel that I wrote that I submitted 100 different queries. I think I submitted after my third draft. That I needed way more. I needed to polish that thing up way more than I did. And so with my fantasy novel, I said, well, this is probably the only novel I'm ever going to try to, this is going to be my last shot. So I want to make sure it's my best shot. So I polished that thing up. I bet you I reread that thing 40 different times before I started submitting it to those 6 agents that I submitted it to. And that's a lot of rereads, tweaking this, that, the other. And so I would say that's way overkill, but for me, I needed it because, I was still learning how to write. I just wasn't that talented to begin with, and I
What
really had a
about
big learning curve.
what about the second and third times, Brian? Did that change? Were you doing that with?
Oh yeah, yeah. Once my first book was published, and then I was under contract for 2 more. The deadline was every 2 years I had to produce one of these big books, and I have a full-time job, so I'm producing these books on the weekend, and so I had to hustle myself. So those went through both the second book and the third book went through 3 drafts of my own, then another edit after my editor at Saga Press got a hold of it. So that's 4 drafts. And then another 2 or 3 with the line edits. So that's about 6. Again, that's about 6 or 7 to 8 times that I reread those books, just with all those edits. And I don't know if that's typical of what Chris Ruocchio does, or I'm sure he didn't do 40 rereads of his first Empire of Silence, but because I mean, that's maniacal. You don't need to do that, folks, but well, some of you might need to, but I'm just saying, don't rush your book out. That's all I'm saying. Whether it's self-publishing or going for the traditional route, just don't rush your product. Don't get so excited that you put something out there in the self-published world that you look back on 12 years later and you're not that proud of.
So still then, how did you know when you were done? Because I know that there's this, there's a way in which you can become too self-conscious and navel gazy, and you can rewrite your sentences so many. I'm thinking of like Wordsworth's The Prelude, right? He was rewriting that thing until the end of his life, and it turns out that the first time he did it was better. It was fresher, it was more vivid and sort of intuitive, and it just had more energy and life to it. And by the time he was done just redoing it and redoing it and redoing it, it just had the feeling of it being coiled and no longer elegant or anything like that. So, how do you know when you've done too much editing, or how do you know when that moment is right to just say, okay, I'm done with it, it's out of my hands?
It may
Through
be that
experience.
yeah, well,
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead, Chris.
yeah. It gets easier, that's for sure. Even if
Yeah, most
you're
definitely.
rewriting it 40 times, like you get a better sense of what you're doing just from practice. It's like we always talk about writing like it's magic, right? Like a lot of other writers are really really bad about this, right? They'll talk about the muses and like all the esoteric habits of famous writers. Like, I have a special writing chair. I have a special writing house, right? I use a goose feather quill in my gazebo. Like this all this does is raise the barrier to entry for like new writers, right? They think, I don't have a writing gazebo. I don't have a goose feather quill. I wouldn't know how to use one if I had one. Like I hate when writers do that. Writing is not magic, and neither are books, right? Like, writing is a trade. It is a craft. It can be honed. It can be practiced. You can improve at it, right? The same like as woodworking, as cookery, as anything. There's this sort of sense, and I think it's partly because we like fetishize like pantser writers who are like, oh, I just sit down and I like write my great horror novel. Like I outline like really, really meticulously. And so I have a reputation for maybe being like too much of a stickler, but like ultimately I know because it's done and like I have a feeling that it is ready. Right. Like it's very much a like the targeting computer has been switched off. Like I feel good about it. I think you can um get to that feeling a couple of ways. One of which is just like sheer exhaustion, right? That first time, like you're just sick of looking at it. You like, I'm like, okay, look, like I've been at this long enough. It's time to try. And I think you should trust your gut when that happens, right? And your gut is not actually thinking for you. It's part of your brain, and that's a different part of your brain, and it's telling you it's time. Trust that, right? But another thing you could do, maybe this will work, is that you don't know actually, but somebody else might. Maybe give the book to somebody else, or even better, if you have someone who's willing to listen, read the book out loud to them. And if you get through it without cringing, right, you feel pretty good about it, it's time, right? And you might be wrong, you might have really bad taste, but your friend might have really bad taste. But the fact that you made it through it without cringing at your own work means that you're there, right? Good writing sounds good to your ears. Your ears also map to a different part of your brain, and it's not the part that did the writing. And so, if you can read the book to your siblings, your parents, your spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever friend who's willing to put up with your shit, and you don't even have to read all of it, right? You can like, look, can I read chapter 1 to you, right? Like, what do you think, right? Because they should be able to tell in that window if they're not blowing smoke up your ass if you've got something, right? You might not have it yet, but you're on the path of getting it, right? So I think that reading the book out loud to an audience and not like half-assing it under your breath to yourself can really communicate whether or not the text is ready in some form or other. I besides reading out loud is fun. And if you're having fun, that's a really good sign. If you're reading out loud and like this is good, you're there.
that's the best piece of advice. If you're having fun writing your story, the reader's going to have fun reading it. Now, if you're not having fun writing your story, I guarantee you your reader is probably going to struggle with those parts too. And that can go from chapter to chapter. You know, sometimes there are certain chapters in my books that I just had a blast writing, and they went fast and quick, and they turn out wonderful, and they're my favorite chapters, and they're my readers' favorite chapters. And then there's other chapters in my books that I was really kind of struggling to make it through it, and they kind of, you know, it kind of, you can kind of tell a little bit, you know. I think the reader can kind of tell, but that's, you know, I'm, you know, maybe you know, when you know, as like I said, I did 40 rereads of my first book. And then when I only did like 3 reads of my second book, I was like, oh my gosh, is it going to be that good? Because I did 40, now I only did 3. And then when the book 2 came out and people said it was better than book 1, I'm like, oh shit, you know, maybe that tells me something, you know?
Yeah, there's no substitute for practice either, right? Like, the more
Yeah.
you write, the more you figure out what your method is. And like you were saying, Brian, right? Like, there isn't a right way to do it. The right way to write a book is the way that results in your writing a book, right? Now that could be as esoteric and weird as you need it to be. Like, if you have an extra house that you only do your writing in, right? If you're George Martin on his DOS computer, okay, man. Like, if that method results in a book, cool, right? You know, if you outline and that gets you to the book, great. If you don't outline, that gets you to the book, you know, also great. I personally believe outlining is better, but that's just me. You know, as long as it gets you where you're going and where you want to be, like, that's your method. And the more you figure out what your method is, the more you write, the more you figure out what your method is. There's really not a substitute for that, because you will get more assured as you go. Same with any skill, right? Like, you have to practice at it. Like, nobody is you know, going to, you know, cook at a Michelin star level the first time they pick up a pan, right? Now, some people have like talent, will get in there faster, but you're never starting out at the top, right? Like, you gotta work on it. You know, doesn't matter what your talent is. You know, and it isn't magic. You know, it's just really fun. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you got to put in the work, even though it's fun. You got to sit down on the days you don't even want to do it and do it.
Yeah.
And it is work. It's fun work, and it pays off, and you're proud of your accomplishment when it's over with. But it is work. And there's a lot of people that will just not ever. There's a lot of dreamers that'll never have the dream come true because they just quit doing it. Right. So just as long as you keep going and keep going. Christopher is kind of an anomaly because he got published so young, and his books were so damn brilliant that I'm just like, and I told you this the first time I met you, dude. I said, man, this is the next best thing since Dune, you know? And your prose, when I read someone like Christopher Ruocchio's prose, I put it up there with, because when I try to emulate certain writers, and those writers are Tad Williams, George Martin, Larry McMurtry, people that I really love their prose, and I would put Christopher Ruocchio right in that group. He's that good, man.
Geez, man. Well, thank you. But I also, like, I started practicing seriously really early. I think that's where, you know, I was a weird kid, right? You know, like, this is like all I did. Like, I didn't, you know, I didn't have a social life. I still, like, kind of don't, right? You know, I just did this, like, very obsessively. As soon as I realized I didn't have to be 80, right? Which I think it's Christopher Paolini's fault, right? Eric came out when I was 10. I was in 5th grade, and I was like, oh, like, 15 is only a little bit older than 10. Like, why not? Maybe I can, like, beat his score. I didn't, as it happened, but, like, 15 is, like, really young to get a book done. But you know, I just, like, really, really wanted to do it, right? You know, you know, if you know what you want to do, you know that this is something you want to do, you have to, like, practice at it, right? But like you were saying, you know, it is fun, but it's fun in, like, the way that, like, getting punched in the face in boxing class is fun, right? Like, the getting punched in the face isn't, like, that's not the fun part, right? It's the, you know, it's the getting, you know, it's the struggle is fun, right? And if you if you don't enjoy how hard it can be sometimes, because actually, like I think the chapters I get the most sort of praise on are the ones that took me like 2 months to write. There's a chapter in this latest book that took me 2 months, which is as long as it took me to write the last novella I wrote, which is ridiculous, right? And everybody's like, "Man, that one really paid off," and like that chapter made me want to jump out of this window. Like it was terrible, but like I'm really glad that I wrote it. So it's like it's a weird kind of fun, right? So sometimes it's miserable. Every time I get to another step, I'm like, oh, right, reviewing proofs. I hate this part. But then I do it again, right? I don't know what that says about me, but like you have to like, you just have to like want to do it. I like still don't really know what else I would do with my life. If I wasn't doing this, like what would I do with all that time? People are always like, like, oh, do you like watch any TV? Like, no, like I would rather write my own books than keep up with whatever else at this point. And maybe I'm missing some good shows. I don't know, but this is still my favorite thing to do. So
Yeah, I hope because for me, the reason I decided to sit down and write is because there wasn't a story that had ever been told the way that I want it to be told. And I'm not saying that my book's any good. I don't know. Other people can be the judge of that when we submit it, but um, that was like the driving thing. And based on what you guys said, I wanted to tell you, for me, the experience was like I spent like 3 years getting the first half of my book done and struggling and struggling and struggling. And then we set ourselves like a deadline, and then I went really fast. My wife and I are writing a book together, as I said, and we went really fast for like a year. In the second half of the book, we realized when we finished, always the writing advice is get through your book, write the full book, get to the end. And that really helped. But we realized the second half of our book was really good. And then when we got our feedback from Matt, he said that the book really picked up around page 300. And the problem with the book was the first 300 pages. And I'm like, wow, isn't that interesting that the part that I was rushing on is just objectively better? Like when we read it out loud to each other, we like the second half better. And one of the problems is when we submit to different agents now, we're supposed to submit like the first three chapters. So what we did is we took all Matt's advice and we went back and rewrote like the first half of the book. And so we think it's better now, but we don't know. And I was going to ask you guys, so I'm in the process right now of finishing revisions and edits. I'm a school teacher, as I told you, Brian. My February break just started, and I've got like 9 straight days to finish this book up. And I worry that it's too long at 750 pages, especially given the fact that I'm a first-time author. Not a first-time author, because I've published a bunch of articles online, but this is my first novel and my first foray into fantasy literature. So when it comes to fantasy and sci-fi, guys, would you say there's a limit regarding how long a debut novel can be? Because on the other hand,
Well,
go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
well, you were asking two guys whose debut novels were
Yours is almost
big.
800 pages, right?
It was my first one was 250,000 words. Now you said yours was 750 pages. How many words is it?
I don't know. Like my wife knows on Google Docs right now, it's like 780 pages. And so I'm assuming when I transfer it to Word, it usually goes down by like 20 or 30 pages. So I'm assuming it's going to
Okay.
be like
All right.
750 pages. I forget how many words it
That,
is.
that seems like it would be about 180,000 words to me, just
Probably.
based off of what you're saying.
It's too
Um,
long,
but
right, guys?
you're asking Brian Lee Durfee and Christopher Ruocchio, whose books were 200,000 words or longer, and that's breaking every rule in the debut author rule book. Am I
See,
right,
that's what I
Christopher?
thought too, because
oh
I was
yeah,
like
yeah.
leaned on Robert Jordan.
It's been to my pain though. I think 180, if that's about where you're at, Jordan, is probably okay. Um,
You think?
I think it's probably okay. So to answer like the basic question, is there like really a limit? The answer is yes. It's dependent on how many pages they can like physically glue together, right? We've like totally pushed this limit before. Maybe not necessarily with debut writers, but like Name of the Wind is huge, right? Name of the Wind
Tad
is
Williams to Green Angel Tower, right? I
is
mean, that
also enormous. Yeah. So this is where I was led into the woods. I submitted a nice 130,000 word manuscript. I have been told repeatedly, 200 plus thousand words, not going to happen. Baby writer, you're going to like, it's very uncommon. You're like, no one will buy it. My agent has told me, like, if I told her I'd written a 200,000 word book, she would not have signed me. Like, so I got there, like I said, sort of by cheating in the revision process with my editor, and she told me, "Bro, we published Pat Rothfuss and Tad Williams. You're gonna be fine. We can do whatever you want." And I had that repeatedly said to me years and years and years and years until suddenly it became a problem. Because it became a problem when I turned in a 320,000 word book called Kingdoms of Death, which I was then told we're not allowed to print 320,000 word books anymore. It's 200,000 or else. So they split my fourth book into books 4 and 5, Kingdoms of Death, Ashes of Man. And both of those books are generally regarded as like pretty good, but like way worse than 2 and 3 by comparison, right? Because that happened to them. And then this was a factor in why I had to change publishers because those books had been split. I was like, hey, am I going to have to split the fifth book we were originally planning on too? And they said, I don't know, man, maybe. And I was like, that's not a great answer. And I couldn't get a better answer for about a year. So I had to work on book 6 under the assumption that, yeah, maybe you have a book 7. And when I came back with half of book 6 written, I'd been working on spec for by that point like 6 months. And I said, hey, I've written this book with the intention of there being another one. They were like, we never promised you that. Like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, actually, they had. I had assurances the 7 was going to be fine. In between that, I don't know, maybe, and trying to deliver for a contract. And things did not work out. So like long books are tricky because I feel like I've been rambling a lot. I'm really sorry, guys. But long books are tricky because they take up more space on a shelf in the stores, right? So if you've got a book that's like 3 inches versus a book that's like 1 inch, Barnes and Noble is going to order like a third as many copies as they would of a shorter book, and that means that you have fewer books in circulation. That means you reach fewer readers early on, unless they print a ton. And even if they print a ton, Barnes & Noble might not order them. The books might not physically be in front of their face. And if you're a debut writer, that's kind of where the book needs to be for them to know, right? And so longer books are not going to reach as many people because they aren't going to print as many. And the publishers are disincentivized to print them too because they can make a longer book more expensive, but they can't make it twice as expensive. They can't make it 3 times as expensive. And so their margins get tighter the longer your books get. And so publishers don't like them. And this like just makes everybody uncomfortable. And then paper gets really expensive because of the pandemic and they don't let you print the book at all. So you can run into these problems. So I strongly would encourage up and coming writers to write under 200,000. 180 is like totally cool. 200,000 is fine. But like, this is like my do as I say, not as I did thing. Like I was sort of, I don't want to say tricked, but I was misled a little bit when they said that it was totally going to be fine. Really long books and really long series turns out that can be a tough mathematical game sometimes.
What about you, Brian?
Any epic fantasy I might write in the future is probably going to be as big as the ones I just wrote. That's just the fact. But I've been working on some mystery novels and horror novels and stuff like that, and they would all come in around the 125,000 word mark. I mean, I'm not gonna just make those things bloated and I mean, I do eventually want to write an epic horror novel as big as The Stand or as big as It. I mean, that is one of my goals, but that's down a road, maybe. If that happens, if it even ever happens, I got so many ideas of things I want to write. I don't know if I'll ever get to all of them, but my publisher kept adding ideas to my book. He's just like, we need to expand on this scene. We need this scene bigger. We need another scene over here, to tie these two together. So he was always encouraging me to just go bigger, and we were going to do 5 smaller books, but he wanted to do 3 big books, and that partly of that is because the contract I signed was for 3 books. And thankfully he was open to just letting me do really large books. I mean, My first book was 250,000 words. My second book was 300,000, and my third book was 350,000. And those are all way bigger than anybody should be doing, you know. But me and Christopher Ruocchio, we're very garrulous with our words. We just spew them out, spit them out.
Yeah, I'm getting worse. Disquiet Gods is 285, it's almost as long as Demon in White was. It was 325. I cut a lot out.
That's what we like to hear. Well, I'll give you a compliment, Brian, because I haven't read your books yet, but as I told you when I messaged you, I'm reading it. I'm going to read it in my spare time when I'm done writing, like in the evenings over my February break. And it's going to be one of the next things I review on this channel. And one of the interesting things about your work, Brian, is I have legitimately, and I'm sure as an author, you would have a different experience, but I have not heard a single person not like your books who has tried to read your books. So I'm part of Mike's books patron Discord, and I'm part of different online communities. And when people sit down and finally give your books a shot, they always like it. I have not had a single experience where someone has said, "Oh, I didn't like these, I gave up," or whatever. So I'm really excited to dive in. And actually, speaking of that, I like pinged the Mike's patron Discord, and I told them that you guys were going to be on, and I asked if anyone had any questions. And someone named Aaron wants to know what you're doing next, Brian. I don't know if you can talk about that, but are you what's
Um,
up next?
yeah, before I answer Aaron's question, I don't know if you've watched my videos where I read out loud my negative reviews from Amazon and Audible and Goodreads.
I haven't watched them because I
Th-
don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear anyone
those are
insult
some of,
you.
I'm telling you, those are my favorite videos I've ever made because I just laugh. I mean, you would, if you can laugh at yourself, and some of those negative reviews are funny. Some people have a real comedic way of tearing down a book and crapping all over a book, and some of them are just funny. I enjoy reading them, and I don't read the whole review out loud. I just pick the funny lines from the negative review. So there, believe it or not, Jordan, there are people out there that have not liked my books. You can't find them. I find them on Goodreads all the time. Um, and I'm the type, I'll read the reviews. I enjoy reading the reviews, good, bad, or indifferent. I enjoy
You
them.
want the unvarnished truth. You want to hear what people are
Yeah,
saying.
and there was a couple reviews that pointed out some things that actually I was like, oh God, they're right about that. I should have done that differently. It actually sometimes people make a point that's actually valid. Um, okay, what was the question that was from the Discord again? Because I
He just
forgot
wanted
because I
to
went off
know
on that.
what you're putting out next because it sounded like he was
Okay.
excited for the next thing.
Oh my gosh, I've started two separate prequels to the Five Warrior Angels. I've started a sequel series. I've started a handful of different mystery novels. I've got a couple of horror novels that are finished that I'm tweaking. I don't know which one will, I mean, I've discussed some of this stuff with my agent, and I've discussed some of it still with the editor at Saga Press, and I don't know what direction I'm going to go in. None of it at the moment is to the point where I feel comfortable putting it out there yet, because a lot of it's just not finished. So, like I said, a lot of it's just started. But the ones that are finished, I still just still a few things that are bothering about me that I need to figure out, iron out. So
Mm,
that's kind of where I'm at. I, I
yeah.
would like to do I would like to do a sequel trilogy to the Five Warrior Angels and a prequel trilogy, kind of like Star Wars did.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of like to do that, and I've got tons and tons of notes for all that, and I've got several handfuls of different chapters written in both the sequel and the prequel. So
Mm.
that's kind of where it all stands. I mean, if something right now, if something of mine was to be published again ever, it wouldn't be for a few years. Just so people know.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Thank you for that. Um, So here's like a shop talk question. So with traditional publishing, I've heard, as you guys were saying, budgets are small, margins are thin, and these publishers aren't always capable of helping out a whole lot to market the book. How does that work? Do authors have to do a lot of that legwork? Because obviously that's one downside of indie publishing is you got to do all that yourself, cover design, getting the word out, building a fan base, whatever, email list, whatever it is. But when it comes to traditional publishing, you think they're going to do that for you. But I've heard that oftentimes they don't, and that sometimes there's politics involved and they're picking favorites. And so, do authors have to do a lot of that legwork? Does it depend on the author? What experience do you guys have with that?
Yeah, you do. Basically, I mean, both Brian and I started YouTube channels. I assume for this reason, right? I certainly did. But it's not so much that they pick favorites; it's that they have to back the sure horses because they only have so much attention and only so much marketing budget. And the thing about publishers is that probably like the top 10% of their writers account for half or more of their revenue.
Pareto distribution.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's Pareto distributed, and sometimes it's even sharper than that. Sometimes it's like the top three writers pay more than like 2/3 of the income. Like it can be that bad with some of the smaller companies. So like at DAW, that's like Tad Williams and Pat Rothfuss are like not quite keeping the lights on, but keeping the lights on. This is one of those reasons I get like mad when people are like they should stop printing Tolkien so that like people can like actually like Tolkien is like keeping like new writers printable. These giant books are subsidizing the ability of publishers to one pay their people and to sign exactly the kind of books you might want that are more obscure. And so you as a new writer, yeah, you absolutely like are going to have to do it, regardless of whether or not you're traditionally published or independently published. The indie guys like to say this is the reason why you should just do indie, bro. Like you're going to have to work hard either way, and they're like not like they have a point. Like that's not wrong. Where they're wrong, right, is that like traditional publishing is going to get you into bookstores, right? It is going to get you some institutional support that you just aren't going to get in like soft ways, right? Like the magazines that like booksellers and librarians read are really only looking at traditionally published stuff, right? Traditional publishing is ultimately a gatekeeping filter mechanism that is at least theoretically supposed to select for quality. It selects for taste. As much and perhaps more than it selects for quality, and that's fine. There's not really a good way to separate those things, but it is a kind of filter mechanism, right? Publishing at least makes sure that it produces a traditional publishing produces at least a consistent product in terms of like quality of materials and like packaging, like art design and stuff like that, and copy editing and stuff like that. Sometimes there are exceptions, like some covers are terrible, right? But theoretically, what you're getting with the traditional publishing contract, more than you're getting marketing, is a more expensive cover art piece of cover art than you could afford, probably, right? And you're getting distribution, which is huge, right? And you're getting notoriety, right? If you're traditionally published, you are a bigger fish in a smaller pond, because this is the real reason to try for traditional publishing if you've got a shot. Is like indie is like by no means illegitimate, right? I would never suppose that like all those guys are hacks or whatever. But like indie is a very, very big C. I think Amazon has something like 1 million new titles every year that come up through KDP, and competing with that on your own, right? Unless you have like a strategy, unless you're like Mr. Beast and you've like figured out everything, is going to be tough. Is going to be really tough. And like by all means, like give it a shot if you think that's the way to go. You don't want to like deal with editors telling you like what to write or something, because that does happen. Now, like like Brian, Joe Monte's he's one of the good ones, but there are editors who will say, "I can't believe you wrote that. Like you're a bad person. Why would you've got to change this?" Or like we're gonna have a problem. Like that does happen too. So if you don't want to deal with that, or you don't want to like, you'd rather make 35% off the retail and then 10%, go for it, right? But you are gonna have to market. There's just you got to figure out what works for you in the same way as your writing process. That was For me, that was YouTube, not Twitter, right? But like, you gotta figure out what it is.
Brian, what about you? What experience have you had
Well,
with
I
Saga
mean,
Press?
I've not had any negative experiences with Saga Press. They've done wonderfully. They let me choose my cover artist, which most authors never
Wow.
get to do that. They let me kind of design the covers the way I want. I mean, nobody gets to do that. I mean, they've been nothing but wonderful. I mean, I think for both me and Saga Press, I'm assuming that Saga Press would say the same thing. We all wish we could be, J.K. Rowling,
Yeah.
right? But to be a mid-list author with the medium success I've had with my books, I'm satisfied with that. That's kind of what I was expecting, and that's kind of what they promised, and that's kind of what they delivered. So I have no problem with that. And as far as the marketing goes, maybe they could have pushed, because when I walk into a Barnes and Noble, I always go to the fantasy section to see if my books are there, and I'll see my books in like a 50% of the Barnes and Nobles. In Utah, they're going to be in all the Barnes and Nobles all the time, but out of state, like I'll see it in 50%. I'll tell you, when I walk into a Barnes and Noble and I don't see my books, I want to burn the whole building down. Like, how dare you not have my books in here? You got 12,000 Brandon Sanderson books. You got a whole shelf of Sarah J. Maas books. Got the whole section, whole back wall is full of, James Patterson. You can't put one of mine in here, you know. So I think the one thing that maybe they could have done better is, I don't know what type of influence publishers have getting books on the shelf. I don't know if there's some payola that goes on. I think in the past there might have been. Christopher probably knows more about that than I do, but I think they could. The only thing they could have maybe done better, but I don't even know if it was possible for them, was to just make sure every single Barnes and Noble always has a copy of my book in there. The as far as marketing myself goes, 4 years ago, almost to the day, because it was right when COVID started, is when I decided to really push my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel had about 20 videos on it for 5 or 6 years prior, but those were mostly the Comic-Con videos I filmed with me and Tad Williams, or like the Comic-Con panels I was on with Jim Butcher or Larry Correia. I had a bunch of those on my channel, and they were getting a lot of views because of Larry Correia and Jim Butcher and Tad Williams. But then around when COVID started, I just decided I'm going to reread every Stephen King novel and leave a review on YouTube. And so that's how this channel really, I started doing like that. But then I was like, well, God, I kind of want to reread every book in my library. And that was my goal. I'm going to do every book in my library. I got 5,000 books in my library. I want to reread every one of these before I die and leave a review on YouTube, to leave a legacy of book reviews for all the authors that made such a big difference in my life. That was the sole purpose. I wasn't thinking about marketing or nothing. It's just like everything else I do in life. I kind of ass backward fell into this thing where my YouTube channel has actually kept my books relevant, because part of my shtick is, and part of my over the top grandiose introduction, and some people, 99% of the people love my introduction. Once in a while I get a complaint like, you're just pimping out your book. So I mean, this is obnoxious, but it's purposefully obnoxious. But what it's done for my books and for Saga Press has noticed that my introduction is, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, The Lonesome Crown, all three
Saga
published
Press.
by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. And today I'm going to be reviewing Needful Things by Stephen King. That's how it goes every time. But it is over the top, and it's grandiose, and it's in your face. But over 4 million people have seen that introduction. And Saga Press is a household name now in the fantasy and science fiction community, I think because of me.
Yeah, I'll just tell you, Brian, when I decided, okay, I want to finally read these and I want to review them, when I went to Google it, I said, oh yeah, what is his series called again? And I actually, like, in my memory, I went, okay, his videos hi, I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of the Forgetting Moon Saga Press. And then that's how I Googled it because I remember, because that's your intro and I watch
Yeah.
your videos.
And I do it, and I'll do it every single time till the day I die, and until I have reviewed all 5,000 books in my library.
Advertising works.
Um, and the thing is, it's just one of those deals where I did not do it as a marketing ploy to begin with. I did it as kind of a little hobby, a little side hobby, but it turned out to be a really good marketing tool because I got a lot of subscribers now and a lot of people watch my videos. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, Christopher, I want to touch on something you said earlier. I'm totally curious about this. I don't want to get you guys in trouble or anything like that. So, but one
No.
other thing I want you guys to tell me about, it's interesting because I'm very personally I'm receptive to feedback. I don't have thin skin. I actually relish the idea of an editor identifying problems that I can't see because I'm too close to the book. But on the other hand, there are aspects of that I worry about too. Like I don't want a sensitivity editor. I'm an artist, not I'm an artist, but it is an art and I care about my art. And I care about this whole writing thing. And I just don't like this. I don't know, this process of combing through a person's book, hunting for anything that might offend a person in 2024. And the thing is, I don't even think there's anything really controversial in my book. It's not driving some agenda, really. It's a complex story with multi-dimensional characters who are struggling to do the right thing, just like you guys is, just like your books. But I just know that whoever takes that job, whoever the person is who is combing through my book looking for indiscretions, is going to be the last person that I want doing that. And I also know that whoever is doing this to my book, that they're living in a bubble, right? So when they tell me that something in chapter 4 is quote unquote problematic, it might be something that a 31-year-old, blue-haired, septum-pierced Oberlin or Brown graduate is going to see as problematic, but that 98% of the world will not find to be offensive at all. And I didn't even know there was such a thing as sensitivity readers until I actually was listening to Nelson DeMille, of all people, on a podcast complaining about this, the fact that some young editor got a hold of his book and was like, you can't say dame or you can't say criminal, or I forget what he said. It was ridiculous, whatever it was. So I'm just curious, guys, you don't have to share your experiences, but how widespread is this? Can you get around this if you're a new author? Because I am fairly intransigent, and much as I want to, as you guys said, I will make any edits you want me to make. Everything people have told me about my book, I'm tempted to say that makes sense. I'm going to fix that. But with this stuff, I'm like, I'm not doing this. Leave me alone. And I don't want to have to go through that whole thing. Like,
Sure, sure. So with regard to really any edit that you don't want to do, right? You need to keep in mind this is a negotiated process. Now, with depending on the sensibilities of the editor, right? If you've got someone who's really, got a bone to pick about a particular issue, that could get tough, right? And there, there it's sort of, you have to do the same thing you do with any other job, right? You who is that person's superior, right? And you have to file a complaint about your coworker essentially with superior, right? Like that, that sucks. And that could make things hard long term, right? It can be tricky, right? But a lot of the times when an editor finds a problem with a book or something that bothers them, right? They might have identified a weakness in the text, but their prescription for how you treat that weakness might not be the right treatment, right? They might say, "Hey, I don't like that. These two characters are siblings. Maybe if they were friends, that'd be better, right?" And then you're like, actually, what if they are estranged secret siblings? You come up with a better solution, right? I don't know, right? Um, so often when your editor says, "Hey, I don't like this. This doesn't work. Whatever," Because often this doesn't work is actually just code for I don't like this sometimes too, right? Because it is often just a personal taste thing. You can figure out a solution that isn't the one they offer you, right? And that often is the right thing to do. Is is like, well, because there might be like sort of non personal reasons, right, for any of this stuff too, right? So it might be like, oh, well, your solution doesn't work, Mr. Editor, because you don't know about book 5 yet, right? And like what you suggested as a fix won't work because it breaks book 5, right? So we have to do this instead. And these all these moments are episodes for you to get creative and to think inside the box
I
in
see.
as contorted a way as possible to sort of make things work in new ways, right? And the sensitivity reader stuff like that can be difficult because that's like an article of religious faith for some people. And when you say I'm not gonna change that for you, right? What you're saying is I am a filthy unbeliever, and they don't like to hear that. So like
No,
that's
you're right.
tough.
I don't think I would say
Right.
that. I think I would just be shocked and dismayed at the state of the world to know that there was a person combing through my book looking for things to be outraged about on behalf of people that they are not. Like, will this line upset like a person in a wheelchair who is Filipino? It's like, come on, guys. Like, this is like it's too much. It's too much. So I didn't know the extent to which they actually hire these people to like go through your book. It seems like a waste of money. Is that a real thing? Do they do that in the I mean, this is genre fiction. You would think that like the people who read
Well,
like epic fantasy
okay,
would not.
clearly, the publisher gave Nelson DeMille's book to a sensitivity reader, and why a publisher would give a Nelson DeMille book to a sensitivity reader is
Right.
beyond me, because I've read every Nelson DeMille book, and part of the point of his whole books is to be politically incorrect with his main character. At
Yeah.
least the John Corey series,
Oh yeah, it was
that character
prostitute.
is
That's what it
yeah,
was. They wanted him to write sex worker, which is,
okay.
again, that's not actually semantically correct. That's actually vague. That's like a euphemism treadmill problem where a sex worker could be like someone who does pornography on the internet. Like it doesn't have to be like that's not a good edit right there.
Yeah, but I've never if my books were ran through a sensitivity reader, I never knew it. I don't think my editor would have bothered with that, and they never even asked. The only thing that I guess would have been a sensitivity edit that they made me make is there is in book 1 and book 2, well, on all 3 books, there is this a barmaid, your typical bar wench who's got a big bust and people notice her big bust, right? But it's kind of a plot point that she has a big bust and she's noticeable. There's a reason that it's in there. And my editor did say, will you dial just we can mention she's got a big bust, but just don't mention it as much times as you mentioned it.
Shoot, I have that
So
in my
I
book too.
edited out, yeah, so
Right.
I edited it out, 75% of the mentions of her physical attribute. Even having done that, I read in some reviews that I get from on Goodreads and Amazon, there's somebody's like, because if you mention one if you're a male author and you mention one female body part, suddenly you've got the male gaze, suddenly
Yeah.
you're anti-feminist, suddenly you're all these horrible things, even though you only mentioned it once.
Yeah.
It's almost as if you've mentioned it 1,000 times.
Mm.
So I get that comment just because I didn't eliminate 100% of the mentions of that physical attribute. And one of the things you're going to have to deal with is you will be, and what's crazy about that is there's a gladiator in the same book that I mention his physique in way more detail, in way more explicit detail of how sexy this man is. Nobody ever gives me shit about that. So sensitivity readers are just going to be out there in the world. Every human being is going to come to your book with an opinion, and you're just going to have to deal with it,
Yeah.
because there's going to be everybody that writes a female character, there's going to be somebody that tells them they can't write females for shit. Meanwhile, there's going to be females that read your female characters, and they're going to relate to your female characters, and they're going to think they're the best female characters. And so you just got to weigh those two
Yeah.
opinions and just be like, you know what? Everybody's coming at your book from a different bias, and you just got to deal with it. You just got to bite the bullet. You can't like lash out at them and
Yeah.
be like, well, 90% of the people that read my book think my female characters are just fine. So F you. You can't do that. You just got to be like, for whatever reason, that person thought I wrote female characters like crap. That's fine. That's their perspective. Let them have their opinion. So the sensitivity readers, in my opinion, are just everyone in the world is going to find a problem with everything that you do. Look at Tom Brady, arguably the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL, and there's people out there that still think that guy's a bum. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They'll still criticize him for something, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Guy achieved, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, sorry, Brian. Go ahead.
No, I was on a little bit of a rant, but yeah.
Well, it was your
let's
turn.
end the rant.
Jordan wound me up a couple times, but like ultimately, like you just can't really. No, when it's your editor, it's hard. But like when it's like reader opinions, I don't want to say they don't matter, but like any individual opinion, when you have like 10,000 of them to choose from, is statistically insignificant. I've said before. There's an article in the Guardian last year. R.F. Kuang was saying that she wishes Goodreads would get rid of the numbers just so we could read everyone's opinion. And I feel completely the other way. I just want to know, is after 10,000 reads, is my book a 4 or is it a 1? Because if it's a 1, I goofed up. If it's a 4, I did all right. And everything else, like if everybody who read the book told me it was bad, then I did a bad job, right? But if anybody tells me I did a bad job, that's just a person, right? And their opinion is probably wrong, right? As far as I need to be concerned, right? Because it seems like I'm doing okay. Like most people have enjoyed the book, and we talked about this, Jordan. I'm with you that I think Jordan, that I think objective artistic quality exists, and I think that you can like sort of gesture at it, approximately by looking at like everybody's opinions and averaging them and getting a sense, right? Especially over time. And so, if you got 10,000 people who say, yeah, this book's pretty good, you can rest as an author. And if somebody says this book was bad, it made me feel bad about myself, man, I did not set out to do that to you. I'm sorry the book hurt your feelings. Sheesh. I just wanted you to have a fun time reading about space Romans. I am sorry. You are so bummed. But you can't control that. It's a very, I guess, stoic point, but I am not in control of other people's feelings. I have never been in control of anyone else's feelings ever once in my life, and I never will be. And I write books. If you don't like them, that's fine. My books, like I said before, my books are for anyone. They're not for everyone. They're not for people who don't like them. And if you're a person who doesn't like the books, that's fine.
What is it Nietzsche said? My philosophy is only for those who have the ears to hear it. Which I always thought, Nietzsche was very arrogant. I think he had syphilis at that point, but
yeah. I don't want to necessarily be in the same camp as Friedrich here, but it's not for everybody. And I'm not going to change who I am to please random people on the internet, right? I'm never going to change what the books are to please people who don't like them, right? So I'll write the books as they are, and I'll trust my instincts. If someone's hurt, gosh, if they feel the need to reach out to me and say, hey, your book hurt my feeling, I'll say, man, that was not my intention. But I'm never gonna change the material to please someone who's not a factor in my life,
Yeah. I'll just answer the question by saying I'm against censorship of any kind. So, and I think sensitivity readers are they're censors, right? And I want every opinion out there. I don't care how weird or bad it is. I don't want MSNBC censored, Fox News censored. I don't want Trump censored. I don't want Biden censored. I don't want myself censored or the guy down the street. I just, I want everybody's opinion. And then if you're smart enough, you can sift through it. And if there's things that are in a book that are super R-rated and you don't like R-rated books, pick up the next book that's not R-rated and enjoy that. If you If you don't like sex scenes, don't buy a lot of romance novels. If you don't like, Tarantino movies because they're too bloody, don't watch them. But I don't want to censor Tarantino
Yeah.
just because a few people don't like his dialogue and his bloody, grim movies,
I
right?
appreciate that. That's I think that's the only way forward. That's the only correct perspective in a country like ours that is this robust, dynamic, vibrant, multicultural. Everyone's got different beliefs, everyone's coming from a different place. And so you just have to you go with that free speech perspective there. Last question, guys. I really appreciate you sticking around this long. Just one last thing. Go as long or short as you want. I've been wondering this, because I've never had the experience before. Is writer's block real? I just wanted to sneak this one in, or is it just an excuse? I'm seeing a lot of writers lately get book one done or get book one and two done, and then that's it. Suddenly, oh, I've got chronic fatigue syndrome or any number of different things. I just can't. I have writer's block. I need 12 years to get the next book out. I don't know what that's like, so I sympathize, but I've never had the feeling of sitting down when I go to write and I'm just totally like staring at the screen and a full day goes by and I've written nothing. Do you guys think writer's block is real, or is it some kind of psychological like problem? That is it, like a work ethic problem? What is it?
I think that most writer's block. So I don't believe in writer's block as like a unique medical condition or anything. Like you don't have writer's block. You could be experiencing a problem with the material that you are trying to produce, and I think most of that comes from insufficiently imagined what you're working on. This is why I outline, because I get hung up on like what needs to happen next and in what order and like what's important and what should I not forget about. And if I write an outline, right, I effectively write a draft of the chapter that's like 3 paragraphs long instead of writing a version of the chapter that's 30 pages long, or whatever, right? And so that way I waste a lot less effort figuring things out. And once I have that roadmap, it's a lot easier for me to write. There's some days where I just like don't like I don't feel good. I didn't get enough sleep or something like that.
Sure.
But especially now with the baby. Uh, but I find that like most people who say, "Oh, I have writer's block," and they sit there and stare at the Word document for an hour. They go on Facebook, right? They see someone has a dumb opinion, and they write 2,000 words explaining why this person is dumb and should feel bad and should kill themselves, right?
Right. Isn't there something they could be doing to like fix their writer's block? It's like, okay, I'm clearly distracted, so I'm going to get this app for my computer and I'm going to block out my social media usage and I'm just going to make this writing happen.
Well, that productivity filters like that are super helpful. I use them myself. I made it basically impossible to see Facebook and YouTube until like 3 p.m. Which is useful because I will go broke watching YouTube videos. But really, I mention this because like you go on Facebook and your writing works suddenly. Someone has a bad opinion about, I don't know, Star Wars movies.
Right.
This is my
That's true.
weakness. And you're like, wait a minute, and then your writing is fine. Actually, you could write the whole time. It's a miracle he's cured. Right. But the problem is that you like haven't thought through the scene, you haven't thought through the chapter, the sequence, the book, right? This is why like you should. This is why I think people should outline. I think people who don't outline, I think the first draft is their outline, and I just think they
Yeah,
like worked a lot
that's
harder to
true.
get that outline done. I personally think they're just people who are better at writing their first draft as a draft than others. I certainly like can't do it. It took me 3 years to write Empire of Silence, from like beginning the project in earnest to it being done. It took me between 6 and 8 months to write every other book, and they're all longer, or they were all longer at least originally before splits and things happened. And so outlining like really really helps. And if you like, look, if you find you're having a hard time with any phase of like the whole writing exercise, is because you haven't figured out what your method is yet. And if something's not working, you need to sit back and try something new, right? It's like trying to it's like trying to get any new skill. Like, oh, like I don't know, like I haven't found the exercise routine that gets me to actually exercise. Okay, I'm still looking, right? But like it's got to be out there, right? You got a sense of what works for you, or you're like dieting. You have a sense of like what foods you like that aren't candy. Like how can you like lean into those in a way that's like good for you? Same with like trying to find a writing system. Like okay, pantsing it is not working. Maybe I should think about outlining. And you can figure out what those outlines look like. Like your tools should always serve you, not the other way around, right? So if something's not working, change it.
Yeah, as far as writer's block goes, and I think just like I said, there's a billion different pathways to writing a novel and getting published. I think there's a billion different reasons people don't write and get published. And so for whatever reason people aren't writing, I don't know if there's no magic pill to become a great writer. There's no magic pill to get yourself out of writer's block. It's just like Christopher said, you just got to figure it is what it is that's holding you back, and move forward. For me, it's just pure laziness. If I've set aside a day or two to write and I find that at the end of those 2 days I haven't done it because I was lazy and there were easier things to do that day, you know. Sitting down and watching 4 John Wick films in a row was just easier than getting on the laptop. You know what I'm saying?
I
And
love
sometimes
that.
that happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes that happens. It happened the other day. That's why I mentioned it. I was like, oh, I can get all 4 John Wick films on Blu-ray for $5 off Amazon. Yeah. As soon as they came in the mail, I was like, oh, well, I plan to write this day, but I guess it's John Wick day.
It do be
That's
like that.
the
It do
form
be
of
like
writer's
that.
block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys, for coming on and sharing your wisdom. I hope this is helpful for people at home who are going through this process. I certainly am. I thought it was helpful. It was really lovely to meet you, Brian. Thanks for doing this, even though we hadn't met before. And again, thanks for Christopher for the 100th time of you coming on. I really appreciate it, guys. It was lovely.
Yeah, likewise. Good to be back.
All right.
Hey, yeah. Thanks for inviting me.
Of
It's
course.
good to see you again, Chris, too.
Yeah, man. Likewise. I wanted to say when. Oh, we're still recording.
Oh, want to let's get out.
Oh,
Yeah?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All
My
right.
bad.
Bye, guys.
Bye.